Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Reducing Food Waste in Your Home Kitchen webinar. I'm Lisa Fishman, nutrition professional in Aroostook County, and we'll be joined today by my UMaine food team colleagues, Kate McCarty, Kate Yerxa, and Lori Bowen, and our special guest, Anna Hewitt, who's a UMaine University of Maine Cooperative Extension Master Food Preserver volunteer. Thank you for joining us for this latest topic in the Cooking with the Maine Harvest webinar series. These webinars deliver current research-based recommendations for healthy cooking using some of the great produce from Maine farms, tips for shopping local, and food projects that will keep you busy and engaged this winter. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and of course, nutrition. And finally, we want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. Today, we will focus on reducing food waste in your home kitchen. We've got lots of tips and techniques to help you today. We have our webinar set up so that you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. But we do want to answer your questions, so please ask them as they come up for you during our presentation by using the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thanks again for joining us. Let's get started. Today, we're discussing ways you can reduce food waste in your household. Perhaps you struggle to use up leftovers or find yourself frequently buying produce only to have it wilt in the crisper drawer during the week. Maybe you typically do a pretty good job using the food you buy, but you've changed your shopping habits due to the coronavirus pandemic and find that some new or larger food purchases are on the verge of going bad. We'll help you to identify reasons food may be going to waste in your kitchen and show you ways you can better use all of the food you purchase, help you reduce your environmental impact, and even help you save some money. So what's the problem with waste? Well, did you know that the average American throws away 3.5 pounds of food each week? It turns out that food is the largest component of municipal solid waste in landfills. Food waste in landfills produces methane gas, a greenhouse gas far more potent than CO2. Most of the food that is thrown away is perfectly fine to eat at the time it is tossed. Food that is wasted not only wastes the water, soil, energy, and labor used to produce that food, but it also wastes the fuel, refrigeration, and packaging to get it to the consumer. There are many reasons food is wasted in our country, from supermarkets over-purchasing to ensure shelves are full, to restaurants serving large portions to make sure people feel they got their money's worth. A lot of food waste happens at the institutional and commercial level. Average American families throw away over $1,000 worth of food each year because they don't plan ahead, they overbuy, and they don't keep track of what they need to use before it goes bad. Households often waste food by overbuying and not using it all up. Fortunately, food waste is an issue that is becoming more important and more visible. Imperfect produce is being marketed as a lower impact option. Gleaning programs connect excess food to volunteers who harvest it for food pantries. Grocery and other stores are finding ways to donate excess product. Chefs are creating dishes and menus from food scraps and highlighting species of fish, cuts of meat, and parts of vegetables that were once considered trash. In some places, community refrigerators allow people to share their leftovers with strangers. Although food waste is a huge problem, it is one with many possible solutions, and reducing waste has been proven to make a measurable difference in reducing greenhouse gases. Reducing food waste is an opportunity for you to save money, reduce your carbon footprint, and experiment and be creative, since you really don't have anything to lose. Kate will be sharing some strategies for reducing food waste in your home, and hopefully you're going to gain an idea or two.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So hello, everyone. I'm going to discuss the importance of planning in helping you to reduce your food waste. So planning helps you to avoid unnecessary packaging, to bring home the food that you need, want, and will actually use, and to make sure that you spend wisely. So here's a few helpful ideas for planning. First, keep it simple. So find ways to simplify your kitchen and cooking, such as making a weekly meal schedule. Shop for the same ingredients every week and then use them in the same or different ways. You could make a big batch of something on one day and then portion out meals to have for the rest of the week. But in general, it's helpful to create a framework or rhythm to the time that you spend grocery shopping, preparing food, and keeping your kitchen clean, which will open up more time, space, and energy for playing with ingredients, enjoying the process, or sitting down and enjoying the meal. And then consider a recipe as a guideline. So once you feel comfortable and it's safe to do so, consider that recipes are not set in stone. Of course, the more you cook, the more comfortable you will feel with substituting what you have on hand for something else that a recipe calls for. We'll include our own Make Your Own Recipe resource, which has helpful guides for casseroles, skillets, grain bowls, soups, and other dishes that let you use what you have on hand. And when it comes to shopping, it's important to shop with purpose. So one of the easiest ways to reduce waste is to be mindful of what you bring into your home and kitchen. So plan your meals ahead of time and make a list before you shop to reduce impulse purchases or forgetting essentials and to help you stick to a budget and meal plan. Take inventory of what you already have on hand before you buy more and pay attention to how quickly you use things up, especially perishable items. And then keep some shelf-stable items on hand so that you can incorporate them into meals when your other supplies are running low or you haven't planned ahead. So now let's discuss the importance of food storage. So storing food properly is essential to reducing waste in your kitchen. Take the time to properly prepare and store your food so it doesn't go to waste. Make sure that you're refrigerating and freezing your food properly. So when you bring your perishables into the kitchen, you'll want to check the temperature of your refrigerator and freezer to make sure they're working well and staying cold enough. So a thermometer is an inexpensive kitchen tool that you can use to make sure your fridge is set to 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and that your freezer is at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And although foods will stay frozen at temperatures above 0, they will degrade more quickly, which will lead to spoilage. When you're storing food, figure out a system of organization and storage that works for you. Label bulk ingredients so that everyone in your household knows what they are and where to find them. Make sure dry ingredients are stored properly so that they don't go stale or rancid. I put most of my bulk grains, flours, nuts, seeds, dried fruits, and beans into glass jars, which allows for airtight storage, easy access, and keeps them visible at a glance. Most produce doesn't need complicated storage and will be fine on the counter or in the refrigerator if you use it up in a few days. You don't need to keep things in plastic bags or wrappers if you're going to use them quickly. And it's helpful to prepare your vegetables ahead of time so they last longer. Cut carrots into sticks and place them in a glass jar and then cover them with water to keep them fresh. But keep an eye on the water and change it frequently, especially if it starts to look cloudy. Wash, dry, and chop lettuce and other greens and store them with a cloth to absorb extra water and then to help keep them damp and in an airtight container. Roast your chopped broccoli, cauliflower, beets, or other vegetables with olive oil, salt, and pepper, and then eat them immediately or store them in an airtight container so that you can easily add them to salads, grains, pastas, or just eat them as is. So a little prep work will help make those whole ingredients that otherwise might go to waste easier to use. And paying attention will really help. Easy to say, harder to do. But just beware. So will the loaf of bread on the counter get eaten before it goes stale, or should you just keep it in the fridge for a few extra days, or freeze slices of bread and take them out as needed? I typically eat my dinner leftovers for lunch, but if you don't like eating the remains of a meal another day, you can just make enough for one meal or plan to use already cooked food in other recipes. Make sure that you label and date things in your refrigerator or organize the space so you know where to find it. and consider creating a leftovers section of the fridge so that other members of your household know what needs to be eaten first. And it really helps to take an inventory often, or to keep a list on the outside of the fridge and freezer so you know what's in there and know what needs to be eaten. So speaking of leftovers, making the most of your leftovers is a sure way to reduce food waste, save money, and eat well. Your leftovers can be kept in an airtight container, jar, or even a bowl covered with a plate, but properly storing them will keep leftovers from drying out or wilting. It's best to use leftovers within a week of when they were cooked, so if you won't get to them that soon, you could put them in the freezer as soon as possible after cooking. Using up leftovers is a great opportunity for creativity. Of course, eating what you already have cooked is the simplest, lowest impact option, but getting creative with odds and ends and making leftovers into a different tasty meal can be delightful. So Anna is going to do just that, and she's going to show us one of her favorite ways to repurpose leftovers in the kitchen. Anna is a master food preserver volunteer, and she took the training back in 2015. So we'll hand it over to Anna in the demo kitchen.
Okay, am I good to go? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Hi, I'm going to be talking about using up leftovers, and we're going to make some hand pies. And before I start that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my approach to using leftovers, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. It's very subjective what you like to eat leftover, and what you have in your kitchen. But a few things that I do is just thinking about how I can make something I already have into something better. Today we're going to make hand pies, and we're going to take a filling that I have on hand and then put it into some pie dough. And that's one way of transforming something you already ate into something slightly different. If I had leftover grains like rice or oatmeal, I might not want to put that inside a dough, but I could use them in some sweet or savory pancakes or other baked goods. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about vegetable and protein fillings in a second, but you can also make hand pies with fruit, but not all fruits are great cooked. So you can think about if you have some apples that need to be used up, that would be great in a hand pie. But if you have oranges, maybe put that in a smoothie or something that works better for that type of fruit. So hand pies are just one of the many stuffed doughs that come from around the world. There are also empanadas, pierogies, calzones, pasties, dumplings. So there's lots of different options for taking your leftovers and putting them in a dough and transforming them into something that you will enjoy. So I usually use homemade pie crust because that's just easy for me, but you can use any crust that you like. Today we're going to be using a store-bought crust. And then fillings can be anything you have on hand that's already cooked. So you could use some leftover meat that's cut up into smaller amounts, or like a ground beef that's already cooked. You could use beans, cheeses, mashed potatoes are really good. And then you can kind of combine things. So today we're going to use some of my leftovers, which I have some black beans and corn that were cooked with some onions. And then I mixed that with a baked sweet potato and added some cilantro and some chipotle pepper. And I'm going to set that aside for a minute and get our dough ready. So whatever dough you're using, you're going to roll it out and cut it into a circle. Usually I would maybe roll a small piece into a bigger piece, but this is fine too. And I'm just going to use this plate to measure something about, I think this is about 7 inches wide, and you could make it any size you want. This is just kind of the size that I found to be useful. So we have a circle of dough, and we're going to put some filling in, I think about 1/3 of a cup. This may be a little bigger than I normally do, but you don't want to have too much filling because then it's hard to put in. So this is about the right amount of filling. You can see what works for you, but then we're gonna fold the dough over. And there's a few different ways. I'll do this again just so you can see, but there's some different ways of closing it up. So you just kind of want to pinch the edges together. And this is what I'm doing is I'm squeezing and folding and pinching. There's a lot of fancy options that you can watch on YouTube if you want, but this is just one way that I do it. So you want it to be pretty well enclosed. If a little bit of the filling leaks out, that's fine. And you're going to cut a few slices in the top where you can use a fork. One thing I did not mention as I was talking about fillings is that you don't really want to use uncooked vegetables. Those could be really good in something else like savory pancakes or a stir fry, but vegetables that haven't been cooked yet have a lot of water in them, and that will kind of come out as they're baking, and it will end up making your dough soggy, which you do not want. So use something that's already cooked when you make your filling. I'm just going to show you again. I don't know if I'm going too quickly, but so you just make a circle, and I have extra dough here, which I could roll out again to make another one, but I'm just simplifying it for now. Then you're just going to put more filling in. So the nice thing about these hand pies is that you can bake them right away, or you can freeze them. And so what I do sometimes is just make a whole bunch and then put them in the freezer, and I can use them later. And I'll talk about that a little bit more after I finish demonstrating this. So another way to do it, if you don't feel like folding, is just using a fork to make the edges push together. And then you can also use your fork to poke the holes. So we have a couple hand pies here. And I can put these right in the oven at 400 degrees for 20 to 30 minutes. If I have the time and energy, I might brush the tops with a little bit of beaten egg or cream, and that just helps the dough brown a little bit more and it just looks nice. Not necessary. And then you could also take a tray of these and put them right into the freezer. If you're going to freeze them, they need to be frozen before you put them in a container with a bunch of them in it. So freeze them on a tray, and then once they're frozen, you can transfer them to a Ziploc bag or other airtight container. And you can take them out and bake them as is, just frozen, put them in the 400 degree oven for about 30 minutes. You'll know they're done because they're golden brown and the filling should be maybe a little bubbly, or obviously not frozen anymore, but if they're golden brown, they should be done. If you are freezing them, you can put them, keep them in the freezer in an airtight container, probably for 2 or 3 months, and just take them out and bake them whenever you need. And I think that is pretty much what I had to share. So hopefully that will inspire you to make something delicious with your leftovers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. You made that look really easy. I always feel like I've been a little intimidated by the idea of making hand pies, but you made it look very accessible, so I appreciate that. Anna also shared with us some great ways to repurpose leftovers in the kitchen. So things like food scraps, leftovers, peels or stems from vegetables, and other odds and ends into dishes. So we do have a few ideas that we could show you, but we primarily type them up into a document for you, since it's just a list of ideas that you could incorporate. So Kate, I think that's the next slide. If you'll advance our slide one more, even. One more. A few more. There we go. Yeah, so we've got a few ideas here for you to creative ways that you could use some foods that you might have in new ways, and rather than just having to pitch them after they don't get eaten. But again, Anna shared so many with us that rather than, of course, read them to you now, I'm going to send them to you after the webinar. All right, so moving on from leftovers, another thing that might be contributing to food waste in your home is some confusion around what's known as product dating. So these are dates provided by the manufacturer of food products that can mean different things. So a little understanding of what these labels mean will help you know if a food is safe to eat even after that date has passed. So first is the sell-by date. So sell-by date is a date that is communicating from the manufacturer to the store the date before which they should sell the product. So this is not considered a safety date. So if you have food on your shelves that has a sell-by date that's already passed, it's typically considered still safe to eat. Then there's a use-by date, which is the last date recommended for using the food at peak quality. So again, that is a date that's related to quality, not necessarily safety. And if it's stored correctly, the food product is still safe to eat up to 1 week past the use-by date. So you see a use-by date that's gone by, you still got another week. And then there's best if used by or best before date. And much like they sound, these are freshness dates. So the date recommended for best flavor and quality. Foods such as baked goods, cereals, and frozen entrees will have the best if used by date on them. And foods with this type of dating are safe to eat after the date, but perhaps not at its best quality. So all of these dates don't necessarily indicate that if they pass, you should throw it out. So consider what the date actually means and then use your judgment to determine if it's something that you'll still want to eat as far as the quality is concerned. So the freezer is a great place to help you store excess food that might otherwise go to waste if you try and eat it fresh. But the freezer can also create waste if it's not managed properly. So your freezer can be a great tool in helping you to avoid food waste, but then also can tip over into creating food waste if you just treat it like a black hole. So you'll want to make sure that you freeze your leftovers in a portion size that works best for you. So individual portions will make for an easy lunch or solo dinner. And when you're filling containers for the freezer, be mindful of leaving space for liquids to expand so they don't crack your jars or containers. And before freezing leftovers, make sure it's something that you'll actually want to eat later. If it's not something worth saving, just skip the freezer and compost it instead of taking up valuable space and electricity. I certainly know that there have been things in my freezer that I've kind of been dreading using because I know that they weren't all that good to begin with before they went in. So make sure you're only storing your most flavorful big batches or leftovers. And then keep a freezer inventory to help you know what you have and how old it is. And then use it in your meal planning and update it whenever you add or remove something. For quality's sake, you'll want to use a freezer-grade plastic or glass container in order to protect your food from that cold freezer environment and to prevent freezer burn and oxidation. So as far as the shelf life is concerned, you'll want to use your home frozen foods within 4 to 6 months for best quality. After 6 months, the food may still be safe to eat, but might not be as good from a quality standpoint. So some careful freezer management will hopefully help you reduce waste. All right, so we are going to go to your questions now. And also, if you don't have any questions, we would love for you to share in the Q&A feature some tips that you might have to help you reduce your food waste. So something that's worked particularly well for you at home. So first, Marjorie says we should caution people to avoid hydrogenated vegetable oil in store-bought dough. So these are vegetable oils or fats that are solid at room temperature and that are typically found in processed foods and frequently store-bought dough. I have to admit that I was the one who bought the store-bought dough for Anna. She told me that she used to work in a bakery, so she's very well versed in making her own dough. And I shortcutted with the store-bought. And Marjorie also wants to know if there's any whole grain store-bought doughs, and I have never seen any. I've really only ever seen the name brand and the store brand of that same white flour pie crust. So that would be another argument for mastering making your own pie crust, is to avoid hydrogenated vegetable oil and to introduce some whole grains. And I'm sure it is pennies on the dollar compared to purchasing them as well. And Marjorie also adds that, Anna, your ham pies look beautiful, which I second. So Joyce wants to know what you'll do with your leftover pie crust dough. And I don't know if you're still around over there and want to weigh in with some ideas for leftover pie crust.
Sure.
Thanks.
I actually don't usually have leftover dough when I make the hand pies. I usually would keep rolling and adding I would add the little bits that were left into making another one. So there's usually not going to be leftover dough, but if you do have it, you could sprinkle it with cinnamon sugar and bake it in the oven, or you could freeze it and use it later. You can also put dough on top of something in a dish, but that's not as easy to freeze. So that's one plus for the hand pies. I guess, pie dough is usually delicious. So I'm sure you'll be able to think of something beyond that.
That was always my go-to, was cutting them into little strips and sprinkling it with cinnamon sugar. And they will bake an awful lot faster than the thing you're baking. So if you have leftover pie crust and you make those little pie treats, don't bake them for the entire time that you bake your pie, because they'll burn. They usually only take about 10 minutes to bake. So yeah, make yourself some little pie treats. And Chris wants to know if you bake the hand pies before you freeze them. I believe Anna said that you could bake them off, you could freeze them raw. So right at the step that she had them, where they're all assembled, tray freeze them and then package them up raw, and then you can bake them directly from frozen. So someone wants to know about how to avoid freezer burn, and I can certainly talk more about that. So yeah, certainly we've all seen things go to waste because they are freezer burned after a period of time in the freezer. Freezer burn is when your food is not properly protected from the cold freezer environment. So the air inside a freezer is very dry, which makes sense when you think about it, because any moisture turns to ice. And so the air itself is very dry and will want to pull any moisture it finds into the air. So if that dry freezer air is allowed to touch your food, it will start leaching the moisture out of your food. So that's where that freezer burn is, the lack of moisture, and those cells begin to rupture, and then some unpleasant ice crystals could form. So you get that kind of white, dry, desiccated look that is not very appealing. So the best way to avoid it is to use proper packaging. So using an airtight container, if you use a flexible plastic, like in the form of a zip top bag or vacuum sealer bag, to make sure that those plastics are meant for the freezer environment. So not reusing bread bags or sandwich bags or snack bags, using a freezer grade plastic zip top bag and squeezing all the air out of it. So that will really help to protect your food. If you're using a solid container, rigid sided container like a plastic or a glass jar, they make freezer paper. You could also use wax paper, and you can cut a little piece out that you can put on top of your liquid. So if you put a soup in a rigid sided container, you cut a little piece out that's the same shape as the container and put it on the top of your soup, and that will prevent the ice crystals from forming. The ice crystals on a soup, as long as it's not really old, are harmless, but I know that people are looking to avoid them. So some freezer paper or wax paper will help you avoid those ice crystals from forming. But yeah, freezer burn, really just try and get the right packaging and then use your food within the recommended amount of time. All right, we have a lot of questions, and I appreciate you all adding them. Some tips too for reducing food waste. Beth says, thanks for the hand pie demo. Her husband loves them and now can feel confident in making them, which I agree. I thought hand pie sounds complicated, so I appreciate Anna breaking it down and showing us it's not. Joe says, started using my vacuum sealer to package individual portions of leftovers. And I agree. I also have a vacuum sealer and have been putting it to use. Like if I cook something and don't have an immediate plan for it, but just freeze it, carefully labeled like cooked, I just did several Italian sausages and wasn't going to use them all. So I chopped them up, labeled it as 3 chopped Italian sausages and froze them all together. And then I know those won't go to waste, whereas they were kind of languishing in the back of the fridge and might have otherwise. Mary says food scraps can be used for stock. A great tip is to keep a gallon size plastic zip in your freezer and to just add to it whenever you have pieces of produce that are still good, of course. So we're, anything that you trim off a vegetable that you wouldn't want to eat, we don't recommend using, but anything that you could use, like carrot peelings or onion skins, you could just throw in that bag. And then when you have the bag full, you can pull it out and make stock. I'll do that not only with vegetables, but a chicken carcass. If you roast a whole chicken or buy a rotisserie chicken, just freeze the carcass in a bag, add your vegetable peels to it, and then when you have a free Saturday and want a cooking project, you can start some stock. Mary recommends the book Scraps, Wilt and Weeds by Mads Refsland. Recipes for food you might otherwise compost. Use coffee grounds, banana peels, apple cores, that type of thing. It's a new ad in the Belfast Library. Excellent. Marjorie says how you thaw the hand pies. So Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Anna said you could bake them from frozen. So you can just, she said 400-degree oven for 30 minutes if it was from fresh. So just bake it until it's done after that, but you can bake them from frozen. All right, Kay says, I use applesauce rather than oil and eggs for cakes. So I buy applesauce in a big jar and then freeze it after opening since I don't use a lot of it at once. Microwave it a bit if you don't take it out in time to add to the cake mix. So you sound like you're living my dream because I absolutely admire people who can manage their freezers like that, who take the time to portion out things that they know they're going to use, things that are in season, like create a pesto, or any sort of flavor additives from herbs or garlic or ginger and freeze them all together, sauces, applesauce, things like that, to have on hand to use, especially if it means that you can bake a cake whenever you want without having to go to the store, because that really is a goal of mine. Whenever the urge for cake strikes, I don't want to have to go to the store first to make it happen. Best way to safely defrost an old chest freezer that's filled with who knows what? Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know that I have a tip for that. The way that I defrost our fridge here is to just open the door and, fill it with towels and buckets so that I can catch all of the water. So see if you can a chest freezer. So it's not even going to run out. It's just going to fill up. No, I'm sorry. I don't have too many tips. So good luck. Michelle says we've implemented a community sharing program. That's a great way to consider reducing waste too, is to share with your community. All right, we still have lots of questions and plenty of time, so I'm just going to keep going through these. Okay, so Kay says I bought a machine and reusable bags to remove the air, which is Food Saver brand. So that is great because I absolutely love my Food Saver, but absolutely hate how it only relies on plastic bags that I then just throw away. So I love the idea of paying attention to not only limiting our food waste, but also the packaging, food packaging that, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, we've all seen an increase in single-use plastics as we do more takeout and curbside pickup. So whatever part we can do to reduce that landfill waste is definitely appreciated. Megan uses a whiteboard to write down the menu, helps the whole family know what to come. That's wonderful. And Mary says, I've had problems freezing in mason jars. Any tips? I do have tips. I'm looking around for mason jars. There's one over here that you can freeze in. So the best tip is to avoid using the regular mouth pint jars, because those pint jars, that shape has the shoulders up at the top, which will break. So this is the size that we recommend, or not the size, but the shape that we recommend freezing in. This is a 16-ounce pint jar and it has the straight sides. So when the food expands, it won't push up against any part of the jar. And then leave half an inch of headspace, which will make sure that your lid won't buckle and the jar won't break upon freezing. So make sure you're using the correct size jar and leave ample headspace for expansion during freezing. And for Michelle, we are recording this webinar and we will post it on our website. So we'll follow up with you after the webinar and send you all the resources that we're about to review, as well as the website where the link gets posted. So it takes about 24 hours for the back-end processing to happen with the uploading and downloading. And then we'll post the webinar. And we'll also send out a lot of great resources, including that long list of ideas for repurposing foods into other things in your kitchen that Anna typed up. Joanne says, having lived through many periods of frugality in my life, I regularly saved leftover sauces, vegetables, meats in freezer containers. Periodically, I combine them for a fantastic soup, adding only water, pasta, and rice. These soups rarely need adjustment in seasoning. And she liked the hand pie demo. Thank you, Joanne. So how about, let's talk about herbs. So herbs very often go to waste. So I had this commenter says, I have extras after using some for a recipe, and do they freeze okay? So herbs do freeze well, but however, we don't recommend that you just stick them in a bag and stick them in the freezer because of the way in which they look. So they'll just deteriorate if you just freeze them because they're pretty tender leafed plants. So they don't hold up well just as is in the freezer. So your best bet for preserving the flavor, but also having something that's more attractive looking to use in your cooking, is to puree them with something. So some liquid. I have used water. I've used a stock, so whatever, if you're vegetarian or meat eating, whatever stock you prefer, or oil or melted butter. So all those options work great to puree your herbs with. Just think about your cooking and what are you most likely to want to add to a dish: water, stock, butter, oil. For a while I was freezing pesto, but then I found I wanted basil, but I didn't want the cheese and nuts in everything that I put it in. So what I did was I froze or pureed basil in oil and just froze that. So basically a pesto without the cheese and nuts. And then I was able to use that fresh basil flavor in any of my dishes. And other ways to freeze herbs, I think that's it. Then that's comes in handy where you can portion them out in little trays, ice cube trays, and then package them up in a freezer bag. So it's important to stress when people tell you to freeze things in ice cube trays, you don't have to leave it in the ice cube tray until you use it. Just put it in the ice cube tray, freeze it, and then pop the cubes out and package them up in a bag, which will make storage a lot easier, and then you can freeze something else in the ice cube tray. Alicia says, I have taken to batch cooking and freezing before things go bad, like potatoes. Now we can just grab a bag and thaw to go with dinner or on a shepherd's pie. No more taters covered in eyes. Yes. Especially this time of year, potatoes and onions are difficult to store as the light lengthens, they start to grow. So it's best to just be proactive and mash up those potatoes and freeze them. Or if you're really proactive, you can chop up onions and freeze them. I've never done that, but again, I aspire to be the kind of person who would have chopped frozen onions in my freezer. Okay, so I had another request for the book is Scraps, Wilt, and Weeds by Mads Reflund, R-E-F-S-L-U-N-D. Just passing that along since I haven't read it myself. All right, we got a few more minutes for questions. Oh, Beth says most chest freezers should have a drain plug near the bottom. Thank you, that's invaluable advice. Yep, seconding that chest freezer should have a plug to drain when defrosting. And the Food Saver brand does have hard-sided containers that you can use, not just that are, of course, reusable, not just those plastic bags. Cheryl, I'd say the best way to store your fresh tomatoes this time of year is on the counter. That's where my fresh tomatoes are. They're, greenhouse grown from Backyard Farms, a Maine brand that grows greenhouse tomatoes, and they're fine on the counter. They don't need to be refrigerated unless you cut into them, and then at which point any leftover pieces should be refrigerated. Ooh, Val gives a great tip for combining 2 of our webinar topics into one. Use the Instant Pot to cook dried beans and then package them up in 1 cup to 2 cups portions and freeze them. And then they're ready to go when you have when you want to use them in a recipe. That's great advice. Thank you. When you freeze in a wide mouth mason jar, do you still recommend using liner like wax paper? I don't use that liner trick because I don't mind the little ice crystals that form on top of anything that I have frozen, but you certainly could, yeah, cut a little circle and put it on top of your food to avoid those crystals inside the wide mouth mason jar. Oh yes, drying herbs is great advice. Thank you. Dry your herbs out using an electric dehydrator. You can even pop them in a low oven. So like put your oven on the warm setting, spread your herbs out just on the rack in the oven or on a baking sheet and dry them. And don't store your onions and potatoes together. Yes, thank you. That's good advice. You've been paying attention during all of our webinars. I appreciate that. Okay, any suggestion for milk that is 1 day past the expiration date? So milk that is only 1 day past the expiration date should be fine to use. So let me double check my notes. The expiration date, typically those dates are for quality's sake. So at that point, you're going to use your senses to see if it's milk that you would want to use. So unfortunately, of course, if something's gone bad, then it's time to toss it. But yeah, if it's just 1 day past its date, then I personally would still drink it. Oh, if you store onions and potatoes together, so some produce give off gas that causes other produce to ripen. And so onions and potatoes together can cause gas. The ethylene gas production will cause those onions to sprout coming off the potatoes. All right, we got time for this one last question from Teresa. Hi, Teresa. Do you use the metal rims with mason jars or can you use the plastic screw tops to freeze? So you could do either one. So, you know, the canning jars come with a 2-part lid. Because those lids are hard to find, you could save it for canning, but you can use it for freezing. So if you have those plastic lids on hand, the plastic storage caps, you can use those in the freezer. All right, Marianne says you could use your milk for recipes that call for sour milk. I don't know that milk that's gone by is the same as buttermilk or soured milk, but all right. Oh, my coworker Kay is giving me information about milk, which I appreciate. So milk has a sell-by date, not an expiration date. Thank you, Kate. So milk, plain or flavored, can stay fresh for 2 to 3 days and possibly up to 1 week after the sell-by date, assuming that you've handled it and stored it properly, so that it's been properly refrigerated at all points. So yeah, that's a sell-by date to communicate for the store. And so if you have milk that's past that date, as long as it's within 2 to 3 days, up to a week, you should still be good. Thanks, Kate. All right, so we're gonna send you all of these recommended resources for reducing food waste directly to your email inbox. You'll get all these resources in the follow-up email that I'll send after we log off here, which will include our directory of Maine farm products so that you can shop locally if you are joining us from Maine. And we will be back in 2 weeks on March 9th to discuss how to use your home frozen foods in baking cooking. So if this webinar has revealed to you that your freezer maintenance and inventory could use a little tune-up, we are going to discuss next week how to start moving those previously frozen fruits along. So we are coming up on spring, summer. We'll have some more local fruit for us to fill our freezers with, so you can start to release your grip on your stash of frozen fruit and use it freely in your home cooking and baking. And again, we'll share those resources and from today's topic and the registration for the next webinar in an email. And that is all the time we have for here today. So thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. And a special thanks again to Anna for her demo. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.